So I just finished Death Stranding, a game about metaphors and about logistics. You really have to understand what was going on in Hideo Kojima's life when he wrote this story to truly understand it. And I think that when you can draw parallels to Kojima's own loss, particularly with his fallout with Konami and his loss of a franchise, Metal Gear, that he worked on for a very, very long time, you really start to understand a lot of the pain that he felt that really circulates into these characters and the ideas and the themes behind building each other up, behind helping each other, and these connections that we forge, I think ultimately really kind of draw in parallel to his personal life. Now, if that isn't a game for you, I could totally understand. And truth be told, the game that you play at the end of the game is wildly different than the first, I'd say, 5 or 6 chapters of the game. If there's any criticism I can give of Death Stranding, it's that it's a very slow burn. It took me a little over 80 hours to complete. There were 70 main missions that had to be done. It really wasn't until main mission, I'm gonna say about 35, which is about the halfway point, that I feel that the game really started to explain itself and really started to make me care about the characters in a way that I wasn't caring about them before. Additionally, that's when you start to unlock some of the better tech. And you're not just running around or stealing basic trucks, from the mules or from random enemies to get around, but you're actually starting to build highways, and you're building bridges, and you're building cars, and you're building these vast networks to kind of connect the world. And you're, not only to help out other players, but to help yourself. That's when the game really starts to ramp up. When you get different skeletons that you can select from, whether it's the power armor that allows you to carry, significantly more weight, or all-terrain, or speed skeleton that allows you to run at Mach speeds. You don't get these things until late in the game. Even with some of the weapons that you start to unlock towards the end of the game really change how you deal with BTs in combat and how you interact with mule camps that you see kind of in the universe. That is a very, very different game than the beginning. And I can't help but think that a lot of people based their judgment on this game in the first few hours of just, well, this is what I think the game is, so I'm done. And I think you're doing yourself a significant disservice by writing off this game that quickly, because the writing is phenomenal. The themes are phenomenal, and as you start to get into the late part of the story and at the end, and you start to understand how all these characters connect, it really does hit you right in the gut. I will be a man and admit, I absolutely cried at the end of this game, a couple times actually. It was very emotionally touching, particularly with Cliff's story and exactly what he went through and the pain that he endured and kind of how he was used as a puppet and how he was treated throughout his story. It was very emotional to see that. And I am not a person who has kids. I don't want to have kids, but I can only imagine the pain you go through when you're basically ripped apart from your family and what you're willing to do to get that back. I thought his story was really well done, but I thought all of their stories were really well done. Why does Die Hard Man wear a mask? What is going on with your sister? What is going on with Hartman? All of these characters have really unique stories. And really, outside of Hartman, everybody gets I don't want to say a happy ending, but they get a conclusion. They have some peace with who they are and why they are. We start to, you really start to understand, like, what did Fragile go through? Why does she wear what she wears? Why is she, what is her backstory? And at the end, when she gets resolution in her story, you root for her. You feel like, you know what? I'm happy for you. You went through hell and came back, and through this power of connectivity, you're a stronger person than you were before. And really that can be said with everyone, with the exception of Heartman, who just, God, what a sad story. This guy is having heart surgery and he dies. Basically the void out occurs. His family is taken away from him. He dies. He's in the afterlife with them. And as he's walking into the afterlife, he is brought back to life automatically by this computer, this generator that comes back on and wakes him back up from his heart surgery. He basically lives for 21 minutes and dies for 3. And he does this basically forever. And during those 3 minutes, he goes back to the afterlife to try to find his family. And man, that is just a really sad existence. Unfortunately, he doesn't get a resolution unlike the other characters. I would be curious to see what happens to him. Maybe there are some more lore or some other pieces in the story that better explain what happened to him. But outside of him, everybody does get a really satisfying conclusion to their story. As I mentioned, it's a game of metaphors, and I talked a little bit about how it really relates to Hideo Kojima's personal life. Each of the characters also really are metaphors of their role in the game. Sam Porter Bridges builds bridges to connect people. Cliff is basically somebody who's there to stop you, as a cliff would. You cannot progress any further. And the list goes on and on. But a lot of detail was put into this game, not just in the storytelling, but in the framing and the pacing of the story. And just when you think you have everything figured out, and just when you think you understand what is going on, there's a twist, or there's a turn, or there's a shocking reveal, very similar to what Kojima did in the Metal Gear franchise, that really redefines what you think you know. And the whole game you're playing like, oh, this is what's happening. I think I have it figured out. Even the characters lead you on to believe things that ultimately don't turn out to be true. And in the end, I think it was a lot of shock for a lot of people. And despite what you've read and despite what you think has happened, really until you play it and experience it for yourself and really grow connected to these characters, because you're going to be seeing a lot of them and seeing all of their cutscenes and their dialogue and stuff, you really don't understand the emotional turmoil that they have gone through. And that's really what made me cry so much. Was it was sad, because you really are connected to these characters and you want them to succeed. And it's a triumph when they succeed, and it's also a failure when they lose. I think it's very, very impressive that Hideo Kojima is able to take such a bizarre game with weird whales and squids and this black tar and a baby strapped to your chest that can somehow look and, channel the dead, or not channel the dead rather, but at least, let you know where the dead exist. The fact that he is able to do all of that and have it make sense and have it have a logical conclusion is great. There doesn't need to be a Death Stranding 2, because we've resolved everything we need to do. The world is what it is because of the choices you have made. And ultimately, I think we don't have to have a sequel to this series, because there's really nothing left to tell. The world has done what it needs to do. I ultimately enjoyed this game. I was very, I think had I beaten it, it may have changed my opinion on Game of the Year for last year, just because it had such emotional impact with me. But it is a very long game, and I think that's, if there's any negative, as I mentioned, I think it's that it takes a long time to get going. There's definitely a lot of filler earlier on, and I understand that it's part of the struggle of the game, because later on, when you have to trek backwards, you start to realize how powerful you've become with the tools and the gadgets at your disposal, and places that were difficult, in chapter 1 or chapter 2, you're blowing through in chapter 12 or 13 with ease, which is a really, really great thing. Unfortunately, it is a slow burn, and I think that's probably why a lot of critics, maybe in the sake of trying to get reviews out or whatever, they are very limited in what they show and the breadth and the scope of the game. And maybe it was because they didn't want to spoil anything for you later on. But I'm wondering if critics completely beat these games before they wrote reviews, or if they felt they had it all figured out, because the game takes some very radical changes later on. And there are some very jaw-dropping moments and some very unique technologies that you earn almost right up to the very end of the game that drastically do change everything. So I think Kojima has once again struck absolute gold. I still maintain he is the best video game creator that I have ever, really, played through his games. I think Fumito Ueda is definitely a strong candidate with the Ico and the Shadow of the Colossus, my favorite game of all time, even The Last Guardian. I think he tells very compelling stories without using many words, but I think Kojima takes it to another level with many, many characters, all with different goals and hopes and dreams. They all come together, sometimes a little more convoluted than maybe we would like, but ultimately there is a definitive story to be told there. And you look at his work across the Metal Gear franchise, and now across this, and I fully am excited for whatever he brings next. I think Death Stranding is a phenomenal experience, and I think you should definitely play it. Don't downplay it because of what you've read. Don't downplay it because you think it's a walking simulator. It's much more than all of that, and it definitely will leave you, it'll hit you in the feels. I don't see how it can't. With that, I'd like to close out this review. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.